Well, hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Late Morning with Josh Barnett. We're pleased to have you here, and glad to have everyone joining us here today. This is our first attempt at a live broadcast on Facebook, so appreciate your patience as we go through this for the first time. We're going to be doing this every single Thursday, moving forward, at least while we're all underneath the stay-at-home order. This week, we're excited to welcome our special guest, Mark Armstrong, to Late Morning. Next week, April 23, we're going to have Amanda Patchett with us. Amanda is the IPAI's Learning and Development Specialist. And on Thursday, August 30th, we're going to welcome Adrienne Bailey from the Illinois Department of Revenue. So have a great lineup right now of guests, and we're excited to be able to offer this as an opportunity for all of you to keep up with what's going on in property assessment around the state. If anyone has questions they want to ask while we're going through this interview today, I want to encourage you to go to the IPAI website, which is IPAIeducation.org, IPAIeducation.org. And once you're there, click on the Contact Us link at the top menu of the page. You can fill in that box, submit that question there, and we'll bring that forward for Mark to be able to answer as we're going through the interview today. So with that said, Mark, hey, good morning.
Morning, Josh.
Welcome. We're thrilled to have you with us today.
It's good to be here, even though here is someplace different from where you are.
That's true. We're broadcasting. Well, I'm broadcasting from my home office in Bloomington, Illinois, in the center of the state. And Mark, you are up in Kane County, one of our collar counties.
I'm in Geneva in my office, which is very, very close to my home office.
Well, that works out well. To give everyone some context, if you don't know, so using my wooden Illinois here, Bloomington Normal, where I'm at, it's right here in the center of the state, and Mark's right over here up in the Collier County area, just a bit east of, a bit west of Cook County near Chicago.
I'm gonna say east is a little bit damper than here.
Yeah, in the middle of Lake Michigan. Yeah, right. Well, Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today and to go through our first guinea pig here and our first interview. In the current COVID situation that we have that's upon us, lots of counties, lots of townships and their assessment offices, as well as the overall jurisdiction within that county or that township, they're dealing with things differently. Some of them are dealing with things very much so the same. I know here in McLean County, we have 82 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in McLean County, and 11 of those, so well over 10% of those cases are actually in the rural areas outside of Bloomington Normal. They're in the smaller, more rural communities and more in the farming area of McLean County. What is going on in Kane County? Not necessarily in your office, but Kane County in general. What's happening up there?
Well, as of this morning, we have 473 confirmed cases, including 24 deaths. In the middle of that, there's a little bit of good news to take away. Good news today is relative to what it might have been 60 to 90 days ago. I remember a few years ago, I took a tour with an appraisal organization of the Chicago River. And the tour guide made an announcement that says, we're actually celebrating today because we have some good news about the Chicago River. And well, I wonder what that is. And she said, the Army Corps of Engineers has classified the Chicago River as polluted. And I thought, how could that be good news?
Okay.
Well, up to now, it was classified as toxic. Yeah. So good news can be relative, but we have not had any COVID-19 deaths in the last 2 days.
That's good.
But we still have some grim reminders coming around. I have a mobile morgue outside my office. The coroner's office is next door to my office. And there's a mobile morgue with some 24/7 lighting on a light tower that's portable, so it can be accessed during the non-daylight hours. And it's kind of a grim reminder that it's still kind of dangerous out there. We still have in the county administration building a sheriff's deputy who's going to take your temperature, make sure that you are safe to go in. By the way, if you're wondering, they have more or less a scanner that they don't even need to touch you. They aim it at your forehead. They don't need to take your temperature by some of the more invasive methods.
No, I know, like when I when I've been going out to like if I have to go to the grocery store or something like that, of course I'm wearing a mask. Are you guys wearing masks there on campus if you're going in between buildings at all, or if you have to
We
have
do
it?
have that. I have some of my personal protective equipment here, hand sanitizer, which yes is no substitute for actually washing hands, but we have gloves, surgical masks. Personal protective equipment has been issued by the health department. The health department has given us all instructions on how the best way is to interact with one another. Generally, if it's not done in person, if it doesn't absolutely have to be done in person, it shouldn't be done in person.
Yeah.
The only reason I've gone into the administration building over the last 2 weeks has been for some actual county board meetings where I had some business that I had to present before the board. But even then, more than half of the board members were calling in remotely, and we're able to maintain distances of 10 or 12 feet between people.
Yeah. It's an interesting reality we're currently living in.
Yes.
Of course, the IPAI, our staff are all working remotely. Thanks to the marvels of technology, we're still able to access all of our files on the server and all of our voicemails and keep in close touch with each other using software just like this, even though we're not physically in the office together. And I know a lot of other offices around the state are doing very similar things. But it's exciting to see this new technology being embraced around the state, but at the same time, it's sad that this is the reason that we're having to do it, right?
Yes.
So, Mark, you chair the CAOA, which is the County Assessment Officers Association. It's the county assessors, the folks who serve at that level, whether you're a supervisor of assessments, or you're the county assessor, you're the chief county assessment officer, whatever title may be used within your particular jurisdiction. That statewide organization of county assessors within Illinois, they have a legislative and policy committee, which you chair, right?
That's correct. For about 10 years now.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the legislative and policy committee? Who's on that committee? I mean, do they represent different areas of the state, or how does all that look?
Sure. I've got a map here of the state that shows each of the counties, and we're broken down into 5 regions. So there are 7 total members of the committee, and they're representatives from each of the 5 regions. That way there's a regional perspective. The chair is appointed by the state president of the organization. Then the state president is also an ex officio member. So area 1, which is this area up here in yellow, generally the area above I-80, is represented by Boone County Supervisor of Assessments, Marty Kinzel. Area 2, which is this green area here, is represented by Peoria County Supervisor of Assessments, Dave Ryan. Area 3, which is this Eastern Territory here in purple, is represented by Kankakee County Supervisor of Assessments, Eric Blair. This is Area 4 down here, and it's represented by Kendall Easton, who's the Supervisor of Assessments in Clay County. Area 5 is the lower or southernmost end of the state, and that's represented by Williamson County Supervisor of Assessments, Jeff Robinson. I, of course, reside in Area 1, but I serve as chair. And then our state president is Jennifer Gomrick-Mitten. She is the county assessor because 2 of our chief county assessment officers are actually county assessors, both in Cook and St. Clair. And Jennifer is down here in Area 5. The idea is that we have regional representation so that the ideas that come out of the Legislative and Policy Committee that get forwarded to the Executive Committee have a statewide impact, not just a regional impact. Now, occasionally we'll have a regional impact bill. We had some things about hydraulic fracturing a couple of years ago. That came out of the basically areas 4 and 5 is where that was contemplated being a thing. Mark Becker, who is the recently retired Supervisor of Assessments of Hamilton County, really did the legwork on that. And that was something that I didn't have any background on because we don't have any oil deposits in Kane County.
Right.
But Mark has probably forgotten more than I ever learned on that topic. So
now that Mark Becker is retired, he's working with us to do a complete rewrite of the gas and oil coal course that the IPA has had for a number of years. So we're excited to be able to utilize his talents now that he has a little bit more free time on his hands.
I can't think of a better person to do it than Mark Backer.
Yeah.
So once the Legislative and Policy Committee recommends legislation, it doesn't end there. It still has to go to the Executive Committee. The Executive Committee is also has officers elected by regions, one from each of the region of the representatives, and then it has members of the Executive Board, the President, Vice President, Secretary, and Treasurer, and those officers also serve from various regions. So to recommend legislation and have the association be behind it, it has to go through two steps. First, to be developed by the Legislative and Policy Committee, and then to be recommended or to be approved by the Executive Committee.
Yeah. Now, when we've talked, several times since the current situation began to evolve, I know right now the Legislative and Policy Committee is working on 3 separate bills to put forward to the General Assembly whenever they're able to get back into session. Before you kind of dive into those bills have to do with exemptions. Before you dive into those bills, can you talk a little bit about what brought that forward and what issues you were trying to solve by developing this new legislation?
Absolutely. We have 3 exemptions that require by state statute an annual application. One of those applications must by state law be accompanied by an affidavit. Now, an affidavit under Illinois law means a statement made to somebody who's authorized to hear oaths. So that's the legal definition used there. So that would mean a notary. So the affidavit has to be notarized. So we started getting calls at the committee. I started getting calls from areas around the state, from as far south as Area 5 and certainly in Area 1, generally from the more populated areas, but from some cases from some of the more rural areas, addressing a couple of different exemptions, because we're hitting the time where applications would be mailed out.
Right.
And some people do those in January. A lot of people, particularly for the senior freeze, mail them out in March, because that's about the time seniors start getting their tax returns prepared, so they have all the information that's available to be included on that affidavit. And we are hitting right around the time the governor issued the stay-at-home order, banned gatherings, and the banning gatherings is kind of a big thing as well. I know in my office, once we mail out senior freeze forms, we suddenly, for about a month, will have anywhere from 20 to 30 seniors in the office waiting to be assisted, because they're relatively complex forms.
Right.
To include all that information, because it's not just take this line from this part of your income tax return and plug it in. It comes from a variety of different sources. It includes both taxable and non-taxable income. And we knew with the stay-at-home order, we'd at least have to wait on that. So at the very least, we needed to delay our due dates. And that can certainly happen at the local level under existing law. But a number of people were asking different questions. A good example would be Rhonda Novak, my friend, who's the supervisor of assessments in Will County.
Yeah.
Rhonda does these clinics where she brings in the senior citizens to various areas around the county. She does around 16 of them a year, and she gets about 16,000 applications filed at these clinics. Now, I don't need to be a math genius to figure out, okay, 16,000 applications, 16 clinics. How many of that is coming in that way? Oh, it's 1,000 per clinic. That's a lot of seniors gathering.
That's a lot, yes.
And they're a particularly vulnerable group. So could we do a few things? So first, we started looking at opportunities to change things. For instance, could we just skip the applications on our own authority? For instance, the general homestead exemption doesn't require an annual application. Could we just waive them here?
Sure.
Trouble is, we have a constitutional issue. Article 9, Section 1 of the Illinois Constitution says the General Assembly shall have the exclusive power to raise revenue by law, except as limited or otherwise provided in this Constitution. The power of taxation shall not be surrendered, suspended, or contracted away. So that means only the General Assembly can make changes to what the General Assembly has required.
I have to interrupt you. If if anyone hasn't taken a course with Mark before, this is what's impressive about him, that he was able to quote that section of the Illinois Constitution off the top of his head with no prompting whatsoever.
Well, I get into it a lot because I'm asked these questions a lot.
Correct. Yeah.
So is there an alternate route to providing for this approval? The trouble is there isn't. There is an alternate route provided in some other exemptions, but the problem is statutorily, once the General Assembly has said this is the exception in another area, that means specifically it is not an exception for this area.
Right.
So we at least have that area, but what about the problem of a notarized affidavit? Can we at least waive that? Again, the General Assembly has required it. That makes it really, really something we can't just wave away on our own. Had that conversation with my state's attorney, who assured me that while you might have the best intentions, you don't have the legal authority to do this. So what can we do? Well, we can seek legislation. Well, the answer was, well, legislation, we know the legislature isn't meeting right now. They're probably only going to meet a short period of time. Does this rise to the level where having legislation to solve any problems that might be existing, is that really important? So we started looking at the scope of this statewide. In 2018's taxable year, and that's the most recent year statistics are available, there were about 369,000 senior freeze applications in Illinois. There were the two other exemptions. There were 37,000 standard homestead exemptions for veterans with disabilities, and about 65,000 homestead exemptions for persons with disabilities. So we started looking at, that's the scope of the applications there. Now, depending on your county, this may or may not be a problem.
Sure.
The last statistics I looked at, there were only COVID-19 cases in about 85 counties.
Right.
Some of those counties have smaller populations. Some may have sent out their renewal forms early, have most of them back then. It's not something that's a problem in every county. So whatever solution we came up with did not need to be a statewide solution, but we needed to allow county assessment officers to access it in their individual jurisdictions. So then we started looking at, well, if we don't do this, what kind of restrictions would be on our seniors, for instance, who are going to be applying for this? So just looking at seniors alone, I talked to Barb Jeffers. Barb is the executive director of the Kane County Health Department, and she is right now our CEO after our emergency declaration was made. And I cannot, by the way, think of a better person to be in charge of it. Barb is fantastic. She's super, super smart and amazingly responsive. I sent her this question on Sunday afternoon at about 1 o'clock. By 1:05, she was on the phone with me going over some of these issues.
Yeah, great.
So what we looked at is how, for instance, Kane County does this at our counter. How can we keep seniors crowding at the counter and keep that vulnerable population from congregating together?
Right.
Normally, we'd have them at the counter. We can serve 3 people at a time while others are waiting. And it takes about 15 minutes to get through all the questions to have that application processed. So doing that, we can serve about 96 people a day. Now, if the governor lifted all the restrictions at the end of April 30th and said, not only is stay at home a thing of the past, but seniors, you may go everywhere and do whatever you like. By the way, I don't think that's what's going to happen, but let's assume it did. At that point, it would take us 43 days to process the number of senior taxpayers we normally would see.
Mm-hmm.
That means we could finish, assuming no holidays, but taking off weekends, we could finish on June 29th of 2020. That's not bad at all. That's in a normal year. But talking to the health department and Barb Jeffers, we came up with an alternate way that we would need to adopt. The first thing is we can't do 3 at a time. We have to do 1 at a time.
Yeah.
Bring them in. We have to schedule appointments so they're not congregating, waiting to be helped. We have to bring them into a room that we can sanitize after each person leaves. That's going to take additional time. We want to wipe down and sanitize the elevator, make sure one senior is in the building, in the room, out of the building, and everything's cleaned up. That stretches us from 15 minutes of an appointment to half an hour an appointment.
Yeah.
Once we go to half an hour appointment and 1 person a day, we're now going from 96 people a day to 16 people a day. That increases our time from 43 days to 258 days.
Woo!
If everything is lifted on April 30th, 2020, we would finish taking in senior applications on April 26, 2021. And that assumes we don't need to use the room that we normally use for board of review, which
Right.
room. So obviously we need a solution that can be accessed in the counties that have this problem without forcing any other county who doesn't have this problem to adopt a different plan. So we came up with essentially one solution, but we applied it to 3 different exemptions. And that's why there's 3 separate pieces of legislation that we're proposing. I'm going to use the senior freeze text as an example for what we came up with. It'd be the wording would be a little bit different in every in the bills. But basically, it applies to, first of all, counties that have made a COVID-19 disaster declaration. If it's not a disaster in your particular county, this legislation could not be applied. It's something, in other words, something has to be going wrong already. The second thing is the CCAO, the Chief County Assessment Officer, has to be in agreement with this and observe that it's a problem. If you're in a county that has made that declaration, but all your senior applications are in, nothing else needs to happen.
And that's not the disaster declaration from the governor. That would be the disaster declaration by the county board of that particular county, right?
Exactly. The county board has to have taken that action. So they have to buy into this solution. So if the county board or county commission, depending on what your county government.
Sure, excuse me, also county commissioners, yes, thank you.
Because we have commission counties. If you're in one of the 17 commission counties, this would apply to if your county commission had made that declaration. Then the Chief County Assessment Officer may, again, this is permissive, take these applications in without additional application. They could simply take everybody approved in 2019 and approve them for 2020 without an additional application, provided several things exist. First of all, I mentioned that disaster declaration. Second, the owner has not had a relocation. In other words, the owner still owns
the same house, same property they were last year.
And same owner.
Yeah.
If there's been a sale by January 1st, they're not eligible. They wouldn't have been eligible anyway.
Yeah.
Number 3 is the exemption for 2019 has not been determined to be an erroneous exemption. If an exemption had been granted and it turns out that was in error, this wouldn't automatically create a new exemption in error. And the 4th thing is the owner itself has not asked for either of those exemptions to be removed. We have a number of our residents who maintain houses in both Illinois and Florida.
Sure.
Sometimes they decide to change their residence from one state to the other. They need to call in and remove, because in Florida, if you have a homestead exemption in another state, there are very draconian penalties. We've had people have to sell one property just to pay the penalties that take place in Florida.
Oh my.
So said, please remove this because we're going to Florida, but we want to keep this here because we're going to live here in the summer. You can still have that removed and not have that be a penalty here. Also, nothing in this bill would take away the right of audit that a CCAO already has. We discover there is a problem, and occasionally we'll run into that. I had an application a few years ago where we did an audit and looked at their household income. Now, household income for the senior freeze means the income of the senior applicant, everyone who lived there as of January 1st, and the spouse of the senior applicant, regardless of whether that spouse lives in the house or not. And we do have some seniors who their spouse lives somewhere else. And having met a few, I'm guessing that may just be how their marriage stays together, that they don't live together. So that's the definition we have to look at. So often we'll look at registered voter lists to see who's living there and who's voted there. And if we don't get their income information, we'll ask from it. And I sent an notice out to a senior, and I got back a letter saying, well, you're asking about my adult daughter. She doesn't really live here. She just uses this as her voting address.
Oh.
Yeah, that becomes an actual bigger problem.
Well, oops.
I sent back a letter explaining that, yeah, your voting address is your primary residence under Illinois law. And I got
Right.
letter thanking me and withdrawing his application. So this doesn't take away for that right to be done. So this would be applied under 3 separate bills. It could potentially be for the senior freeze. It could be for the homestead exemption for persons with disability and the homestead exemption for veterans with disabilities. Now, the veterans exemption does have a provision where if you've had a change in disability level, which might change in the amount, you can certainly apply for a new exemption based on that higher amount. If you were, say, a 50% disabled veteran service-connected disabilities of 50 to 60%, that would be a $5,000 exemption. But if you were reclassified at 70%, that would certainly be a higher level. And so we wanted to account for that in this bill. So again, none of these bills would require anyone to do anything, but it would permit CCAOs in counties where this is a real problem to access this and be able to maintain the timeliness of the property tax cycle. We do have some people who have agreed to sponsor the bill in both the House and the Senate. The Department of Revenue has reviewed it and has no concerns about the bill. What we don't have is a bill number, because right now there are no bill numbers. They are not being processed through the General Assembly. They've not met yet in April, and as of this morning at least, they had not scheduled anything in the next 30 days. I would expect the General Assembly to find a way to meet sometime in late May. When June happens, the General Assembly can only pass bills that would have any immediate effect by having a 60% supermajority. It's not impossible, but it does mean some additional hurdles.
Yeah, we're very quickly approaching that deadline where they have to get the budget passed and get that work done.
Right, and that the budget is what's driving this. Governor Pritzker has talked about some of the concerns he has about revenue projections for the budget. So the General Assembly absolutely has a lot of hard work ahead of them. And
I was talking with someone the other day, and they were saying, "Well, I don't understand why the General Assembly just can't meet remotely like some of the other local bodies of government are." And then later on that day, I try to watch the governor's press conference every day, and later on that day, the governor was actually asked that question, and he said, "Well, in order for the General Assembly to allow themselves to do that, they have to meet first in person to vote on that to okay being able to meet remotely like that." And at this point, it's still not safe with the current situation to allow them to be able to come together and give themselves that permission.
Correct. The Illinois Constitution provides for a separation of powers between co-equal branches of government, executive, legislative, and judicial. The Supreme Court has the authority to make its own rules. The executive branch absolutely works under the rules set by the governor and does have emergency powers set up. But the legislative branch does not give the governor the right to make their rules differently. They theoretically could, but they would have to actually meet to do that exactly thing. So something would have to be at least ready for the legislature to do this. I'm guessing they're going to have to do at least one thing in person. And we want to have legislation ready for them for COVID-19 relief. Once this happens, if the legislature will take this up, we want to encourage them to get that to the governor immediately. Under Illinois law, they can take 30 days because there's a right of rescission in the Constitution. There are ways around that the legislature can take. We would encourage the legislature to do that. And then we have already been in contact with the governor's office, so they have copies of this bill. And so they can be ready, and hopefully Governor Pritzker can take action immediately, because even if the legislature met at the end of May and passed this legislation, theoretically, under normal circumstances, it could be 90 days for the governor to sign it.
Sure.
And this would be very important to get done early in the process. Right. So we've been in contact with all the branches of government that are applicable to this. Nothing in the courts, at least so far. So that's not an issue today. And we're very hopeful that if this can get in front of the General Assembly and get heard, we've heard a lot of positive comments from legislators. Good. And we think it has a very good chance of being an option that counties can have available as they work through this kind of unusual year.
Yeah, it's a strange year for everyone.
Yes.
Mark, I know that earlier in the year, the Legislative and Policy Committee had talked about some other legislation that you wanted to get passed. I mean, with the current situation that we're in, I mean, do you think that getting anything else done legislatively with the General Assembly is even a possibility, or is what we talked about maybe earlier in the year for the most part just kind of dead until maybe 2021?
My expectation is that those things will be, let's call it, held over to
Held over.
2021. We got a lot of positive response from various stakeholders on our legislative initiatives, but there is not going to be a whole lot of oxygen in the room in the legislature for things that are unrelated to the budget for the next fiscal year and COVID-19 emergency legislation. And we agree with that. We do not think that our legislative priorities are of such a high priority that the legislature must drop everything else and act on these. We certainly think they're important, but we don't think they're that important. And we would concur in holding over those legislative priorities. If something extraordinary were to happen and the legislature had more time, we would certainly want to fall back in our old position. But that was not our expectation at this time.
Right. Yeah. Which makes sense. So if I can ask you to put your other hat on for a minute as the CCAO of Kane County, I mean, within your office, I mean, as far as operations go, I mean, how are you guys handling the current COVID situation? What have you been doing, and what are you going to be doing? What do your operations look like moving forward right now with where we're at?
We actually got on it very early. We started doing office sanitation procedures at the beginning of March, where we would regularly, multiple times a day, wiping down counters, wiping off keypads, having everyone keep their desks clean. That was when we first noticed this is going to be interesting, because we wanted to lay in a good supply of sanitizing wipes for wiping off counters, places with a public touch. And one of my deputies came into my office and says, well, Mark, those are back ordered till sometime in May. And this was the 1st of March. That's good. So when the governor issued the stay-at-home order, we had already closed the office to public interaction and said everything has to be by appointment only. And the procedure I described for the senior freeze was actually what the health department had signed off on. When the stay-at-home order happened, I immediately sent all my staff home. I came in for every day for the next 21 days until we were prepared to resume essential operations. And we did that on the 13th, so just this past Monday. So we set up some plans to resume essential operations. Again, the health department is in charge, and we worked together with Barb Jeffers and her team on creating some rules that could keep us safe. We retained the no public interaction for the time being. We certainly have lots of phone calls. Our phone calls have increased. Our questions coming in over the website have increased. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
We get lots of information out that way. Teams are coming in on staggered schedules. One team will be working Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Another will be working Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And that way everyone can maintain a minimum distance of 6 feet. In practice, it generally is 12 to 15 feet. There's no more than 7 people in the office at any one given time. And we have 2 members of the staff, senior deputies, who are working at home. And they're really our firewall against an infection that might make it into the office.
Absolutely.
People. We have signs like this posted all over the building, a public health notice about the importance of washing your hands 20 minutes. Hand sanitizer, not a substitute for soap and water. I think a lot of our mothers would have told us that for years. And
for years, that's right, yes.
Pay attention to our moms.
Right.
And so we have a lot of these procedures in place. So far, so good. No problems coming in. And so you can't take your lunch in groups. You can't meet in the break room and chit chat. You've got to meet at your desk. We do a lot of phone calls now in the office. I have an office in one corner, and my assistant chief deputy is all the way on the other side, but usually I'd walk over to her office, and now I'm giving her a call or sending an email. Right. Interestingly, my chief deputy, who is one of the backstop people working at home, has told me this morning she's been doing all the printing of deeds so we can track all the legal descriptions and process them from home. So I was pretty impressed that she's doing a lot of things remotely that I hadn't really contemplated. Our chief technology officer has been working from home for about a month now, making sure that everything is on board there. And we were able to get a lot of things set up remotely that we hadn't tried to do before. Probably our biggest challenge going forward is how we're going to deal with board of review. Now, we've started doing some things remotely. By the way, those of you who are watching who are wondering when the state is going to get the Farmland Assessment Technical Advisory Board together.
Oh, yes.
Remotely, and it's happening this afternoon. And so our farmland committees are going to start to meet. We're going to have our farmland committee meet remotely. And once the farmland committee comes through, we'll have a test for how we start doing board of review hearings. We're setting up to do those remotely, and even the township assessor instructional assembly, which I have to do every December, that's going to be done remotely this year as well. So we're planning things out to be on the safe side, going through the end of 2020, being able to do as many things remotely as possible. So we maintain the tax cycle coming through on time.
Yeah, which is critical for every jurisdiction that is within your county that touches you in some way, as well as
most jurisdictions will have multiple funding sources. This is the funding source that's going to be stable. Income tax is going to drop. Sales is going to drop. We have to at least make sure the timing of the property tax cycle is maintained. Late tax bills cost everyone money because governments have to borrow money to stay open, and they will pass that interest cost on over to the taxpayers.
Yes, that's exactly right. Well, Mark, Alexa's been keeping me apprised of any questions that may have come in. We haven't had any come in yet. I guess we're just that thorough that we haven't left any questions.
That's all, and everyone's gone by now, but
yeah, that could be it too. So hey, listen, beyond everything that's going on, either with the county or with the CAOA, you and your family getting through all of this all right?
Yeah, my daughter is, she was at Millikan University and they've gone to remote classes. And so she is home working remotely, and so far so good there. I think the teachers and the students themselves are all having a little bit of trial and error and trying to figure out just how to do this remote education thing well.
Right.
She's a music education major, so the music classes are kind of interesting, but so far it seems to be working. My wife's holding down the fort at home. She was scheduled to start a new job. That's been put off, understandably. Hard to train new people. We had a new employee to onboard here, which we had to put off because we can't train people from 6 feet away.
Right. Yeah. A friend of mine posted online the other day that he and his wife, since they're staying at home together, are playing a fun game called "Why Are You Doing It That Way?" and there are no winners. That's what he said.
We haven't had much of that happen. We did have some interesting things on Holy Week. It's always very busy at church.
Sure.
So instead, we in addition to online worship services on Good Friday and Easter morning, we did an online Seder with 6 different families. On Maundy Thursday. And then Easter morning, we did have a socially distant sunrise service with some close friends up on a hill, sitting apart from each other. It almost looked, from a distance, it looked like, wow, those two groups are being really standoffish. But it was a nice thing to be up at 6 in the morning on Easter. And then later in the morning, another friend organized a Easter morning hymn sing out on their lawn. And I am a tuba player, so I was called to shore up the bass part, playing with my goddaughters and their father, again, sitting apart in their driveway. And we had about 30 or 40 people just stand outside their houses in the neighborhood apart and sing Easter hymns while we played "Christ the Lord is Risen Today" and "Up from the Grave We Rose" and other Easter standards. So it was different, but in some ways an even more meaningful observance than usual. like Passover is something, the first Passover is people cowered in their houses while death was outside waiting for to pass by. And now we're kind of a little in the same thing again. So it was very interesting with that.
Yeah, it's been amazing to see how people have been dealing with the current situation, how they've been using technology and other means to still stay connected with folks, even though we're not right there with one another. Whether a school or has organized a drive-by through some neighborhoods with all the teachers on board to wave and say hello to the kids, or people having virtual gatherings of some kind. It's been neat. We are far apart, yet at the same time, it still feels like we're still close together and connected, which is pretty cool.
Just by what you're saying, it tells me it's a good example of how different counties react to things. For instance, use the phrase drive-by. I don't know if you're aware of this. In some parts of the state, that means something very different than how you meant it. So.
Oh, well, fair enough. That's probably true. Yeah. Well, with that said, Mark, thank you again so much for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time to come by and update us not only on what's happening within your office in Kane County, but also what's going on with the County Assessment Officers Association Legislative and Policy Committee. Thanks so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
You bet, Josh. You're welcome.
Yeah, and to everyone who may be watching, again, be sure to tune in next week, April 23rd. Amanda Paget, the IPAI's Learning and Development Specialist, is going to be with us. Week after that, on April 30th, 11 a.m. that Thursday as well. We're going to have Adrienne Bailey from the Illinois Department of Revenue here with us today. If you need anything at all from the IPAI, know that we are here from you, even though we're working remotely. We're still standing by to do whatever we can to help our assessors and auxiliary personnel be successful at the important work that you're doing each and every single day, especially in this new reality that we find ourselves in. So with that said, we hope to see you all soon in person when it's safe for us to get together. But until then, take care, and we'll be in touch. See you next week.